What if I told you that the streets of Nairobi recently transformed into a battleground for justice? Join us as we unveil the shocking events surrounding the protests on June 25th, revealing a nation's struggle against oppression and deep-rooted anger that can no longer stay silent. On Wednesday, June 25th, Nairobi, the capital presented an unusual spectacle. Parliament, a structure usually open enough for student field trips exploring government operations, was now enclosed by gleaming razor wire barricades and a substantial police presence. This lockdown wasn't confined to Parliament alone. Key thoroughfares leading to governmental buildings, including various ministries and City Hall, had been sealed off. Anti-riot vehicles occupied numerous intersections, while additional law enforcement officers, some mounted on horses, patrolled the avenues. Drones hummed overhead. Police canines snarled at anyone venturing too near. The message was unmistakable, and it was one the Kenyan administration had conveyed for weeks. The demonstrations scheduled for June 25th would not be permitted. Kenyans grasped this message clearly, yet opted to disregard it, even as police erected their barriers. Individuals from all walks of life converged on central Nairobi. This phenomenon wasn't limited to Nairobi. According to the local publication Business Daily, the unrest impacted 25 of Kenya's 47 counties throughout the day. The number of participants swelled into the tens of thousands. Based on the most conservative estimates, initially, the demonstrators marched, chanted, and sang. However, by day's end, they were evading tear gas, engaging in skirmishes with police, and often desperately fleeing for their safety. When calm returned, Amnesty Kenya estimated at least 16 fatalities and hundreds injured. The scenes were grim, and if past events are any guide, conditions are poised to deteriorate before improving. To contextualize the June 25th protests, we first turn to an incident involving a teacher and emerging online political analyst. This individual was detained on June 7th, accused of disparaging the Deputy Inspector General of Police, Kenya's equivalent of the deputy head of the FBI. The past tense was detained is deliberate, as this person died while in police custody. Adding to the gravity, the police attempted a rather clumsy cover-up. How clumsy? Following public outrage, they issued a statement asserting, and I quote, "While in custody, the suspect suffered head injuries after striking his head against the cell wall. On-duty police officers promptly observed the injuries and transported him to Mabagarthi Hospital, where he was pronounced dead upon arrival." If this account strikes you as suspicious, imagine the reaction of millions of Kenyans who already harbor deep distrust of the police. They took to the streets on June 17th demanding accountability. During this demonstration, a police officer shot a mask vendor, Boniface Karuki, directly in the face at close range. The incident caught on video rapidly went viral, garnering millions of views across social media and eliciting widespread condemnation from citizens, civil society groups, and international bodies. We chose to highlight this individual's tragic story and the subsequent protest to illustrate the national mood leading up to June 25th. If one word could describe it, that word would be furious. A level of anger that unnerves governments. Regarding the date, the 25th, it's been frequently referenced, yet its significance remains unexplored. Why has it become a powerful rallying call for the Kenyan populace, and what prompted the scheduling of these demonstrations for that specific day? To address these questions, a brief retrospective is necessary. We need only look back just over a year to the intense summer of 2024. Joe Biden occupied the White House, seemingly more physically present than mentally. Meanwhile, Charlie XCX was promoting a new music campaign, and in Kenya, Nairobi, the capital was engulfed in chaos. Consistent viewers of our weekly Situation Room segments might recall our coverage from that period or feature, detailing how the Kenyan administration ignited a widespread youthful uprising. For those who missed it, here's a quick recap. In May 2024, President Rto's government unveiled a contentious finance bill that threatened to drastically elevate the cost of living for Kenyans, many of whom were already facing severe hardship. Citizens responded by protesting in the streets. This resulted in 60 fatalities, numerous abductions, and many more injuries. Even the Parliament building was not immune. A section of the historical structure was set ablaze. In a moment that would forever be etched in memory, President Rto ultimately rescinded the bill and disbanded his entire cabinet, only to discreetly reinstate most members to crucial government roles. This series of events represented a watershed moment in the public's perception of the government. President Ruto's, standing already low, due to continuous tax hikes plummeted to an unprecedented nadir, and has struggled to rebound. Over the ensuing year, government detractors frequently reported instances of state-endorsed abductions and torture. These occurrences became so widespread that John Camo, an editor at the local publication, The Daily Nation, explicitly accused President Ruto of mirroring the actions of former dictator Daniel Moi, notably Ruto's political mentor. It is against this backdrop, a year of simmering resentment and the raw pain of recent extrajudicial killings, that activists organized the protest. Honor those who perished during the June 2024 demonstrations, and so we return to the morning of Wednesday, the 25th, as demonstrators gradually make their way into the urban center. We now wish to present the demonstration through the perspective of one participant, whom we'll refer to as N, to preserve their anonymity. Upon boarding the bus that morning, N perceived that the majority of passengers were bound for the protest. The vehicle felt less like ordinary public transport and more like an instrument of defiance. Regrettably, law enforcement often views such instruments unfavorably. Officers directed the bus to halt at Valley Road, necessitating N and fellow passengers to trek approximately 3 kilometers to reach the Central Business District, CBD, while N had traversed this distance many times previously. On this occasion, anti-riot police intercepted them. They deployed tear gas against the group, compelling them to disperse and seek shelter in a church providing sanctuary, which was also eventually subjected to tear gas. Every demonstrator interviewed shared a consistent account. The police initiated the confrontations. In some instances, they utilized tear gas. In others, whips and batons, but invariably law enforcement made the first aggressive move. As the crowd grew, police escalated from whips and batons to rubber bullets, live rounds, and water cannons, leading to a multitude of injuries. Larry Motto, a Kenyan-born CNN international correspondent, documented police trapping demonstrators in a sealed alley, physically assaulting them, then deploying tear gas in a distressing moment. One demonstrator pleaded with Larry, stating, "If you leave, we'll get killed." He successfully escorted them to safety. Concurrently, the Communication Authority of Kenya instructed television and radio broadcasters to cease live coverage of the protests. In one incident, authorities forcibly entered a transmission facility and cut off free-to-air signals. Nevertheless, most media outlets exhibited resilience, continuing to broadcast even in the face of additional threats from the Communication Authority. As daylight faded into evening, most demonstrators dispersed homeward. Some, however, found themselves stranded in the CBD after dark, and their subsequent accounts were horrifying. Women recounted instances of sexual assault, while men reported ongoing physical abuse. Nairobi was once more engulfed in turmoil, and this time the repercussions might be more extensive than ever. Following the cessation of the demonstrations, several politicians from the governing Kenya Kwanza coalition swiftly labeled the participants as anarchists. They cited multiple cases of pillaging and property damage as evidence that the protests were less about seeking justice and more about exploiting an opportunity for theft. Kipchumba Murkomen, the cabinet secretary for Interior and National Administration, escalated this narrative, characterizing the protest as terrorism disguised as dissent and an unconstitutional attempt to alter the government. It is crucial to note that his remarks bore a striking resemblance in tone to President Ruto's initial stern declaration after the 2024 protests, when he deemed those events treasonous. Murkomen further commended the police for their professionalism and restraint in the face of extreme provocation, asserting that no officer had committed any excesses. In his view, they had effectively thwarted a coup. In a rejoinder on Twitter, Larry Motto countered by stating he had personally witnessed police provoking whipping, tear-gassing, and firing upon demonstrators on numerous occasions. Lastly, Murkomen directed criticism towards the international community, alleging that foreign diplomats did not desire a secure Kenya again. It should be underscored that these diplomats had earlier released a statement advocating for moderation and adherence to the rule of law throughout the protest. Musalia Mudavadi, Kenya's prime cabinet secretary and foremost diplomat, also criticized the diplomatic corps. Yet while Murkomen adopted an aggressive stance, Mudavadi employed a defensive, questioning tone, seeking to redirect responsibility for the disorder onto unspecified protest organizers. Analyzing these two pronouncements, foreign policy journalist Wagani Minor observed that they indicated an administration increasingly under siege, both domestically and internationally. What this implies for the protest movement and President RTO's future, however, remains uncertain. What lies ahead? Writing in the Daily Nation, columnist Louis Naguni posits that Kenya itself is not failing. Rather, it is the ruling establishment that is disintegrating. This sentiment resonates widely throughout the nation, crystallized in the widely chanted slogan, "R must go," a frequent cry at demonstrations. Despite these calls and protests, there is minimal likelihood of President R stepping down before his constitutionally mandated term concludes. He maintains considerable backing from a substantial segment of the populace, and by forming an inclusive government post-2024 protests, he effectively neutralized the opposition. President R's core constituency is rooted in the rural Rift Valley counties that initially propelled him to power. Evangelical congregations, drawn to his financial influence, and a portion of the informal hustler class, who still credit his microcredit programs with providing relief during challenging economic periods. For many within these groups, the protests appear as a Nairobi-centric spectacle, orchestrated by middle-class Gen Z individuals and urban professionals who can afford to engage on social media between work shifts. They might deplore police excesses, yet they fear that persistent instability will deter the very investors whose ventures promise employment. Where demonstrators characterize the current administration as an existential threat, President R's adherents portray him as an imperfect but indispensable guarantor of stability and incremental advancement. This perspective is affirmed by opinion polls. President R has successfully positioned himself as the leading contender for 2027, and most political analyses suggest his re-election is highly probable. For Kenyans participating in the protests, this news is not merely unwelcome. It is profoundly nauseating. This bitter pill is compounded by the apparent lack of a unified ultimate objective for the movement. Currently, while some took to the streets to memorialize the deceased, others harbored hopes for a revolution akin to the Arab Spring. With such divergent motivations, it becomes challenging to objectively assess the protest's success or to forge a cohesive political alliance capable of challenging the incumbent. Beyond the tear gas and social media trends, a stark economic reality persists. Life in Kenya has become oppressively expensive. Food prices have doubled within the last 3 years. Electricity tariffs frequently surge without warning. Job creation lags so significantly behind population growth that each graduation season feels like a collective plunge into uncertainty. Factor in the state's propensity for introducing new taxes and fees, and the result is a pressure cooker that hisses at the slightest rise in temperature, as it stands with the government entrenching its position and rewarding the police officers who assaulted demonstrators. Kenyans seem destined to return to the streets whenever economic pressures intensify, and once more the cycle of conflict and suffering will unfold across our screens. Unless there is a fundamental shift, Kenya appears set on a grim trajectory. We conclude today's discussion by quoting the raw, heartfelt words of Raphael Nambura Mengi, the mother of a young man killed during the protest, words that perfectly encapsulate the anguish of all who have lost a loved one in these demonstrations. I am in so much pain, though events in the Middle East may have eclipsed this news. We hope this video has convinced you that the situation in Kenya warrants your attention. Thank you for watching. What are your thoughts on the events unfolding in Kenya? Share your insights below and subscribe for more compelling stories.